Coinbase just launched a six-figure marketing campaign pushing back against big banks who are advocating for a rollback of crypto exchanges allowing for stablecoin rewards. You actually took to X yesterday and you said that the Genius Act needs to stay as is and that big banks are pushing for a, quote, bailout. Now, the Genius Act passed in July, became law, and ever since then, customers are not allowed to earn interest on stablecoins, but Coinbase and other crypto exchanges are allowed to offer rewards for stablecoins. So why was this important for Coinbase to take on this matter that banks have issue with?
Well, the issue of rewards is certainly important to Coinbase and others offering rewards, but it's most important for the customers who enjoy the benefits that come with rewards, regardless of what platform they use. You know, when the Genius Act passed in July on a bipartisan basis, it was very clear that rewards were an important part of the financial consideration that belonged to consumers and investors, and really were an important mechanism for making sure that they would enjoy the benefits of their participation in these crypto networks. It's unfortunate to see the banks want to relitigate this issue, to reopen a question that was resolved squarely in the favor of our customers, which was to say that they are entitled to these rewards and that they should enjoy the benefits of them.
So how does this marketing campaign work? I understand that there's a social media component. You also launched a new website. Can you just break it down for us?
Well, the campaign is really all about reaching crypto investors and ultimately crypto voters where they live. And so we thought it was very important, first of all, to make clear what the big banks were attempting to do and just how stridently they were pursuing this objective of rolling back these rewards and essentially bailing themselves out of real competition for consumers and investors' dollars. So that involved taking to social media, to be sure, putting up websites to spread the word, but ultimately with an aim towards engaging the crypto consumer to let them know that they need to tell their elected officials, we don't want to see a return to a monopoly for the big banks on providing these types of incentives and to preserve competition for the banks in a new financial system.
Now, Coinbase, I understand, offers a 4.1% reward for holders of USDC stablecoin. And, other crypto exchanges also offer rewards, Kraken being one of them. So I'm wondering, why do you think this is such a big issue for banks that they're fighting against this stablecoin rewards being offered by crypto exchanges? Just break it down for our viewers who might not understand why this is such a big issue right now.
Well, I think anyone can understand sort of the current state of play when it comes to their deposits at banks. Even though funds rates are something like 4.75% or even higher, that's the rate that the banks themselves enjoy. If you have a basic checking account or savings account, you're lucky if you get maybe 0.25%. That's not real economic value for consumers. And in contrast, as you point out, on Coinbase and on other platforms, you can enjoy well in excess of 4% for the stable coins that you hold. I think that the basic message here is that we want to allow platforms like Coinbase, as well as others, to share the economic benefits of these networks with the people who participate in them. Unfortunately, the banks lost that battle and want to continue to fight it, even though this has long been resolved by the Genius Act.
Now, the Blockchain Association actually put out a letter yesterday urging congressional leaders to keep the Genius Act as is, reaffirming the digital asset industry's belief in the Genius Act, wanting it to stay as it stands. Banks are trying to change the language through the Clarity Act, which is currently circulating now through the Senate. So what do you think happens there? And did Coinbase have any part in that Blockchain Association letter that was released yesterday? Well,
we certainly lent our voice to this debate, and we're encouraged that the Senate is working diligently on passing its version of the Clarity Act so that we have a complete market structure for crypto that's been long overdue. Genius was an important first step, but was only the first step, and it's critically important that Congress finish the job. We think it would be a terrible mistake for that final act of this legislative effort to be stalled or impacted in some way by the banks attempting to relitigate this issue of rewards for stablecoins, when it's much more important that Congress and the Senate in particular focus on establishing who is responsible for overseeing crypto at the federal level, assigning jurisdiction to the respective agencies as is appropriate, and creating the final stability and permanent structure that we need for crypto for the United States to continue to compete.
And we're going to talk more about the Genius Act in just a bit. We're going to get into it. But I'm wondering, your CEO, Ryan Armstrong, and other crypto executives earlier this month, they were on Capitol Hill fighting this issue that banks were trying to roll back the stipulation in the Genius Act related to stablecoin rewards. So what was accomplished during that time in DC? And do you think that lawmakers really listened to him and other crypto executives on this issue?
Well, I do think that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are paying very careful attention to this issue. And frankly, we're encouraged that they understand that relitigating old issues of rewards is not the priority at this point in time. We've addressed that issue through the Genius Act. It's much more important for Congress and the Senate, again, in particular, to focus on passing clarity. Brian Armstrong, our CEO, made that very clear to the lawmakers that he met, and I think that message was very well received.
We're also going to talk about the Clarity Act a little bit more in just a bit, but first, going back to the Genius Act, that bill, as we noted, that passed the House back in July. Last time we spoke, you and I, was in July,
yes,
right before the Genius Act became law here in the U.S., the first major piece of crypto legislation to become law here in the U.S. So now that it has been 2.5 months since we got that first piece of major crypto legislation become law, what has changed for the industry?
Well, I think a lot has changed. First of all, the industry has proven that even in the most partisan, divided environment in Washington that many of us can remember, Democrats and Republicans were able to come together to pass sensible rules for stablecoins that really laid the foundation for the broader legislation that we hope will soon pass on market structure. But what remains to be done on stablecoins, of course, the agencies are going to have to write rules to fill in certain details that remain after the act passed. And I think perhaps the best indication of the success of the Genius Act to date and thus far has been the continued growth of the stablecoin market and the continued proliferation and adoption of stablecoins, not just within the crypto industry, but across traditional finance and now many other industries that see that stablecoins really can solve some fundamental problems with the financial system that have plagued us for far too long.
And now, obviously, the Clarity Act, a big priority for Coinbase. You mentioned this when we spoke back in July. And Coinbase actually launched another marketing campaign over the summer, six-figure marketing campaign, pushing lawmakers to vote yes for the Clarity Act. So why is that so important for Coinbase? And what would ultimately change for your crypto exchange if the Clarity Act or a crypto market structure bill becomes law here in the U.S.?
What the Clarity Act provides and what we think the Senate counterpart will similarly provide is a simple, even if not perfect, but simple way for people to understand which tokens may fall under the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which tokens are better understood and treated as commodities that fall under the jurisdiction of the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And overall, we will finally have spot market authority at the federal level for digital assets for the very first time. That's critically important in order to resolve long-standing questions of not only which federal agencies have oversight of this market, but the relationship between the federal government as a whole and state governments that have also attempted to regulate in this area. So there are a lot of open questions that remain regarding the proper rules for crypto. Clarity provides many, if not all, of those rules for us. And I think this is also critically important for the United States' competitive posture versus other countries all over the world that are racing ahead. It's not too late for the U.S. to catch up, but it's time that we act.
You took one of my questions out of my mouth. Is it too late for the U.S. to catch up to other regions around the world? Obviously, your answer is no, and that's why the Clarity Act is so incredibly important in your view. But the Senate is actually working on its own version of a market structure bill. And I interviewed Senator Cynthia Lummis, who is a big crypto advocate. I spoke with her when I was in Wyoming for the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium. And she noted that the Senate is going to incorporate parts of the Clarity Act into its version. And the reason being is because it did, in fact, get bipartisan support. The House passed the Clarity Act back in July, as we noted. And she's optimistic that we will, in fact, see a market structure bill become law here in the US before the end of the year. She said we could see it by Christmas. Do you think that is realistic, especially with everything going on Capitol Hill right now? I mean, we're in the middle of this whole government shutdown situation. So what do you foresee?
Well, Senator Lummis has certainly been a leading voice and a champion for sensible rules for crypto for some time. And so I put a lot of weight on her prognostications, especially in terms of when we could actually see the bill passed. I share her enthusiasm and indeed her confidence that we could see a Senate bill passed and should see a Senate bill passed before the end of the year. There are obstacles, to be sure. The Senate almost certainly will have differences with the House in certain details around market structure that will have to be worked out through reconciliation. And of course, there are other issues in Washington that are taking up the Senate and the House's time. The prospect of a shutdown, for example, being one of them. But one of the things I think the crypto industry has shown is that it can be a responsible partner to both Democrats and Republicans to provide solutions to the problems of reconciliation and differences of opinion about how to regulate this market. And so as the Senate and the House are ready to take up the issue finally and hopefully present the president with a passed piece of legislation for him to sign, we're confident that we're going to see progress made.
What are some of Coinbase's other legislative priorities as it relates to crypto? I know the last time you and I spoke, you mentioned that crypto tax policy is something that you would like to see Capitol Hill take on. Sticking with Senator Cynthia Lummis, she actually introduced a bill targeting crypto tax policy. So what do you hope happens there? What other legislative priorities do you have for crypto?
Well, I would certainly put tax policy, sensible tax policy, at the very top of the list once we move past this market structure effort. And I'm encouraged to see the Senate Finance Committee, even as early as tomorrow, take up the issue. As it turns out, Lawrence Latkin, our head of tax at Coinbase, will be among the witnesses testifying before the Senate Finance Committee, and Senator Crapo chairing that effort. We think it's critically important, again, that crypto be treated no better, no worse than any other asset class in the possession of Americans, and that their tax implications be treated fairly, no better or no worse than any other. Unfortunately, up until this point, we haven't seen the unique nature of crypto assets taken into full consideration when tax rules have been adopted, and we think that it's time that Congress address those issues as well. Tax policy is never easy in Washington, and so we expect some tough issues to be worked out. But the fact that we're seeing the Senate move on tax issues, even as they're working on the market structure bill, tells me that they understand the urgency of this issue and they're prepared to act.
Last question for you. What's the latest with your ongoing SEC FOIA requests? Recently, the SEC Office of the Inspector General found destroyed text messages, and Coinbase has been seeking information through these FOIA requests and other legal action to reveal how agencies treated crypto during the previous administration. So what's the latest there, and how would you compare the last SEC, the prior administration, with how the SEC is now?
Well, the difference could not be more stark, Talia. The fact of the matter is that the SEC under the previous chair took a very hostile, antagonistic view, not just towards the industry, but towards owners of crypto across the United States. And so tens of millions of Americans were at risk of being deemed in violation of the law without ever being told what that law was. We now have a chairman of the SEC, in Paul Atkins, who very much understands that crypto is a critical part of our financial future and is working diligently to pass sensible rules through the Crypto Task Force and other efforts that will serve the American people's interests. That doesn't mean that we don't have issues from the previous administration that continue to, I think, plague the continued growth of our industry. And it's one of the reasons why Coinbase has continued to pursue its FOIA litigation against the SEC. And this litigation is critically important to shining a bright light on the efforts of the previous SEC to distinguish crypto assets from other assets in our securities laws and treat them in an unfair manner. It's even more concerning that as part of those efforts, it appears that the SEC destroyed text messages and other documents that Coinbase and the wider public were entitled to see. And so we will continue to pursue those documents, those text messages, because we think it's critically important that the record be set straight and that we have an accurate record for posterity's sake. And we're hopeful that the federal district court overseeing this matter will continue to pay such careful attention as it has thus far and get to the bottom of all of this.
Paul Graywall, Chief Legal Officer with Coinbase, thank you very much for joining us here in studio.
Thank you for having me, Talia.
Absolutely.